Hello and welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show, where I'm delighted that my guest again is the fabulous Paul Birtill. How you doing, Paul?
Hi, fine, thanks. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it was the feedback to the last session that we did was so good. We thought this should be a regular strand here on the Andrew Eborn Show. We're going to have Birtill's bits and pieces. And I will let you pick the theme each time and share some more of your work. What do you have for us today?
Um, well, this one is a poem about depression, and I do suffer from depression, but fortunately, it's manageable with medication, and it's called Bedtime. Last night, out of sheer boredom, I went to bed at 7 o'clock. It felt odd drawing the curtains when it was still light. I'd not been to bed at this age since I was 8. But life was so much more fun then. I had plenty to do. In fact, I always wanted to stay up late, 9 or 10. Sleeping was so dull. But now it's the highlight of my day. How things have changed. Last night I went to bed at 7 o'clock. Adult life has been something of a disappointment.
And one of the things we speak about on the program is it is indeed mental health, because it affects a lot of people. And until fairly recently, there was a real stigma about it. And I've launched this series called Canned Laughter, which is basically, it's okay not to be okay, where people can talk about their issues. And they come onto the show, and by sharing their experiences, they actually help others. Because you're right, absolutely right. We all suffer in different ways. And if you break your leg, people come and sign your cast and make a joke about it. But mental illness always used to have a stigma about it, didn't it?
Very much so, yes, yeah.
And I think the more we can encourage people to talk about it, the better. And you were touching on last time in earlier episodes about what was really quite a strained household, if you like. You had your mother and father permanently rowing, and the pressures that must have put you on in a small place in Liverpool next to the prison must have been quite tough on you as a kid.
Yes, although, I mean, they weren't rowing constantly, and there was a lot of love in the house as well. And you know, I had all my brothers and sisters around to help, so I didn't carry the whole burden of of it all. I mean, there was other people to talk to in the house about it, but no, it was overall. I would say I had a very happy childhood, to be honest with you. The rowing was just a little bit of a distraction, a little bit of an annoying inconvenience at times, but I mean, it was never very heavy. I mean, he never struck my mother, you know, he never used violence or anything, you know.
And what is, I mean, the trouble is when it is so many of you in one house, you do, as we touched on last time, you have nowhere to run though, do you?
Well, that's right. We had a little garden, but yes, yeah. I mean, it was a small house. There was 6 of us in a 3-bedroom house, and my father had an attic conversion built when I was 10, so I was finally able to get my own room, you know.
And it must. And how? What's the age difference between you and your siblings? Because there's 6 of you all together.
Yes, well, my eldest sister is 76, and I just turned 60 last month, so she's the eldest and I'm the youngest, so 16 years.
And do you get on as with all your siblings?
More or less, yeah. My sisters are more so than my 2 brothers. I've got 3 sisters and 2 brothers, yeah.
Okay, well, nicely balanced. Same with me, although we just did 2 and 2. There was two boys and 2 girls with us. But always there's a little bit of sibling rivalry. What do they do, or what did they do?
One of my sisters teaches for the TUC. They all went to university. I didn't go myself, but they all did. One of my brothers, he went to Oxford. He's a PhD in chemistry, and he's an international scientist. He's the world expert on something called catalysis.
Okay.
He goes around universities lecturing all over the world. And my other brother was a lecturer in economics and also a journalist. He writes for the Irish Post and the Irish World, and he's just got a book out about the Irish language in Liverpool, Gaelic speaking in Liverpool. It's coming out next month. He's a real Irish nationalist. You know, he's got a cottage in Donegal. Although he lives in Liverpool, he spends some time of the year in his cottage in Ireland, and he's a fluent Gaelic speaker, and he teaches Gaelic in Liverpool. And he has an Irish passport, and he's a real Irish nationalist, you know. Whereas I'm not. I mean, I always say I'm half Irish if anybody asks me, but I wouldn't say I was Irish as he does, you know.
And where do you think he got his passion? Let me put it that way for Ireland.
Oh, I don't really know. I suppose Liverpool has always had a strong Irish connection, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's about 1 million Irish people came over to Liverpool in the 19th century, a lot of them on their way to America, but couldn't afford the fare, so settled in Liverpool. I mean, Liverpool does have a strong connection with Ireland, you know. And you used to get the boat across to Dublin from Liverpool, and, you know, there's a lot of Irish names in Liverpool. If you look at in a Liverpool telephone directory, you'll see all the Irish names, you know.
Oh no, that's a huge community, as you say, about 1 million. And have you been back to Ireland? Or have you been to Ireland?
Oh yes, yeah, many times, yes. My mother was from County Meath.
Right.
They had a farm at the foot of Tara Hill, a very famous spot in Ireland, Tara Hill. Yeah, I have been to Ireland a number of times. I'm very fond of Dublin. I really like the pubs there, and I've been to the north as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you have? I mean, obviously a big Catholic family. Your mother probably has lots of relatives over there as well. Do you visit them?
No, they're all dead now. I think my last auntie died about 5 years ago, and my parents are both long since dead as well. My mother had me quite late in life. She was 45, you
right.
know.
Okay. But so she was what? Okay, so she was 29 when she had your sister.
That would have been right. Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah.
So quite a bit, and it brought up your own. And people always we talked about your childhood last time, and that sort of upbringing and how that can shape you as a person. You came to writing quite late. What did you do after leaving school?
Well, it was heavy unemployment in Liverpool, so I didn't work. I just signed on like everyone did, you know.
And you, I mean, those sort of era, I mean, growing up in Liverpool in the 60s that was the golden era, if you like, when obviously those, the Beatles and the Cavern Club. Did you used to go along to that when you were a bit older?
I used to go to Eric's, which was on Matthew Street, which was just opposite the Cavern. It was the big punk rock club in the Northwest. I was a punk rocker briefly. So I used to go there. But the Cavern had closed at that point.
Right. So who did you see when you went to Eric's?
Oh, I saw all the main punk bands there, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Fall, the Buzzcocks, lots of bands. And of course, John Cooper Clarke, before I ever met him.
Yeah.
He used to read there regularly because he used to support a lot of the punk bands, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would have been about 15, 16 when I guess the Pistols played there.
When did I see them there? I think it was 1977, so I was 17.
Well, I said 16. You can let me have a year. That was not a bad guess. That's a bit tough. It's got to be good. But so seeing John Cooper Clarke, who's brilliant. I mean, he, as we said beforehand, you're people growing up on Keats or whatever they learn, Wordsworth you learned at school, to hear someone like John Cooper Clarke, who was just an inspiration, wasn't he?
Yes, I mean, he's a very talented performer. And as well as being a great poet, he's also a very talented stand-up comedian, which people sometimes forget. But he's just a naturally funny man, you know.
Yeah. And brilliant delivery. I mean, my chum Mike Reed does a really good impersonation of John Cooper Clarke.
Right.
But I'm sure everybody does. It's rather like that used to be the thing, wasn't it? Everybody would give their impersonation of it's either Stan Boardman or John Cooper Clarke. That's what they used to do.
Yes. I was interested in acting when I was younger.
Okay.
I very nearly went to drama school as a young man. I was in the Merseyside Youth Theatre for a couple of years and was in a few productions. I was actually quite good, but I decided it was too stressful for me acting, and the life wouldn't suit me. And I suppose I didn't enjoy acting enough to want to make a career of it. But they certainly thought I was good at the Merseyside Youth Theatre, because they wanted me to audition for the Old Vic Theatre School in Bristol, where they used to send people. But I didn't do it, and then I just dropped out altogether. But for a while, when I was a teenager, I thought I might become an actor, you know. And
do you regret not following that path?
No, not really. No, I'm glad I had another art to fall back on, my writing, and I have been quite successful as a writer. So, no, I'm happy with my lot, you know.
No, I don't know. You say you're very modest about your success. I mean, to have John Cooper Clarke and others praising you to the hilt for your writing is superb, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yeah. Yes, my poetry has been very successful. Yes, no, I'm very pleased that I've achieved some recognition in my life. A lot of writers don't.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and even the very famous ones that we know only achieve that recognition after they've passed. So to get it during your lifetime is great. So lots of people will be listening to this, Paul, and they'll be turning around and saying, "Look, what gets somebody started?" Because you started quite late, as you say, you started writing late in your 20s and even later for poetry. For people listening to this now and saying, hang about, this Paul Birtill, we like his attitude, we like them, but he didn't come to this until his late 20s. What would you say to people listening now about how you should get started?
Is that in writing generally or poetry?
Well, both of it. And I'm always fascinating about people starting and the sort of lessons that they learn, if you like. If you went back to a young Paul, when you're 6 or 7, you remember your parents and your father walking you and telling you all these dark thoughts, that sort of inspiration. If you started writing earlier, what advice would you give to yourself?
Well, I don't believe in creative writing courses, and there's over 40,000 of them in this country at the moment. Everybody's going on them. I don't know. I mean, I think the most important thing when you start writing is to actually complete your first manuscript, whether it be a novel or a short story or a play. I think it's important to complete something. A lot of people attempt writing and write a few chapters or something and then leave it. They give up on it. And I think it's important to finish your first piece of work, even if it's not very good, because I think it'll give you enormous satisfaction just to sign it and date it and finish it, you know.
And do you remember that moment with your own first piece of work when you signed it and finished it and dated it?
I do, yes. It was actually a short story which I wrote, and I finished it just at the start of the miners' strike in March 1984, so I remember it well. I'm pleased to say it's since been published in a magazine.
No, quite a dramatic moment. I was up in Durham. I was studying law up in Durham during the miners' strike, so I remember those moments well. And there was a sense of the nation, but also was terrible things were happening. There was also the communities seemed to come together, didn't they?
Oh yes, yeah. It was a tragic period, really. But I was a big supporter of the NUM and the strike, and we always used to give our spare change to the miners who used to have a collection point outside our local library. Yeah, it was quite a sad episode, really, looking back. Yes, and I mean, Arthur Scargill was right, really. I mean, they did eventually close all the pits, you know. We don't have a mining industry now in this country.
And it was tragic. And seeing, as I say, I was up in the northeast during that time, and seeing whole villages, whole communities were just shut down, wouldn't they?
Well, that's right. And, you know, the Tories were using the argument that, you know, we could import cheaper coal, but I mean, it wasn't cost effective. But that's always the argument with capitalism. But there are other factors to take into consideration, like, you know, the mining industry provided employment for all these various communities. And when the mines closed, the local areas they were decimated, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always say that the history repeats itself because we never really learn the lessons from history. And if you look back to some of those sort of moments, what we're going through now in these, the unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, we're sort of turning round and people are going through the same thing. They're being forced to reevaluate their lives. They're being forced to make changes. What advice would you give them?
Do you mean now in this current crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same, similar sort of thing where people, the whole sort of careers are being lost. People are having to reevaluate and reassess what's important in their life and to look at new ways of putting bread on the table, if you like. And a similar sort of thing to what happened during the miners' strike, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Oh, I wouldn't know what advice to give them. Turn to the drink, perhaps.
Okay. Well, yes, yeah, well, I think that's what they said during coronavirus. You're going to be one of three things. You're going to be either a hunk because you're working out so much, you're going to be a chunk because you're eating too much, or you're going to be a drunk because you're drinking too much.
Is that right? I like that. Yes. Yeah.
So it's all good stuff. So let's hear a couple more. Let's hear a couple more from you then.
Sorry, I missed that.
I said let's hear a couple more from you. Pick it.
Right, this one's quite, it's about climate change, so it's quite a current topic. It's called global warming. It was snowing when I woke this morning and was sunny at midday. There was a party having their Christmas dinner in the pub, and I got stung by a bloody great bee. All this in mid-February. I've also noticed those old guys with the end is nigh signboards seem a lot more confident these days, have a certain spring in their step.
Yeah, well, ain't that the truth? And you're sort of turning around. So what do you think about climate change?
Well, I think it's terrible, you know. And it was nice not to see any planes in the sky at the beginning of this pandemic. You know, they were all grounded, and it shows that we can take action when we need to, you know.
And you're right, I felt that the sky did look bluer, didn't it?
It certainly did, yes.
And I think what you sometimes need, you need a spokesperson. So Greta's going around, she suddenly became the figurehead together. And what I liked is there's sort of two ends of the spectrum, if you like, in terms of ages. You've got Greta at one end and you've got David Attenborough at the other, and making sure that you appeal to everybody in between. And I think the message is getting over. We touched on mental health earlier and about talking about that sort of side. And you need to have public figures basically who can epitomize that, because otherwise things just boil down to statistics, and statistics are anonymous. And as soon as you have statistics, you need to personify things, don't you, to have an impact?
Yes, definitely, yes. I'm a heavy smoker, by the way.
Right.
And this one's called Smoking on the Train.
Okay, you can't do that anymore. Go on then.
Not being able to smoke on long-distance train journeys is a real inconvenience. I always have at least one in the toilet. Coming back from Edinburgh last year, everyone was at it, including someone with a pipe. The guard went mad and kept warning us over the intercom. Finally, he said the police were getting on at Crewe to escort all the smokers off the train. He was bluffing, of course. He could smell us, but he couldn't see us.
Very good. He's bluffing about the puffing.
Yes, yes, yes. And here's another one. It's called shoplifting. I'm always pilfering small items. My motto is anything that fits in the pocket goes in the pocket. I save a small fortune shopping this way. Last week, the manager of my supermarket told me there was a special offer on the fish. I felt like saying, there is on the cheese too. It's in my pocket. I expect to get caught soon, but I'm a grand ahead easy.
What I love about this show, this is like the confessional, isn't it? We have, and that, my lord, is the case for the prosecution.
Yes, well, I hope the manager of my local supermarket isn't listening into that one.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Paul. We'll get them to sponsor the show. There'll be a sort of a wonderful, delicious irony about them sponsoring the episode where you confess to nicking their cheese. What is your preferred cheese? What cheese would you choose?
Normally, just white cheddar, to be honest with you.
But, you see, I like something with a bit of kick to it. I like a bit of vintage cheddar if you're going to have a cheddar.
All right.
Yeah, you've got to do it. But what we love is when you can get poetry, and it can encapsulate human emotion. The reason that people love your poetry is you basically say what people are thinking. You encapsulate life both in the good times, and it tends to be the darker times you go for, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, I do write a lot of black comedy. I was just looking for one I thought you might like. I'll read it you.
Okay.
It's called, and this is something that happened to a friend of mine. It's called Cutting the Grass for the Lesbians. His lesbian neighbours said it needed doing, and he volunteered immediately. It was a hot day, and he liked the idea of them seeing him with no shirt on, despite knowing they weren't interested in his body. He mowed the lawn for half an hour, but to his disappointment, they didn't look out of the window once, even though he shouted for a glass of water.
Glorious. And so is this about your neighbour as well? What's your neighbour called?
No, it's about a friend of mine in Liverpool, that one.
Right, okay. And do people recognise themselves in your poem? Do they say, look, hang about?
Yes. Sometimes they do, yes.
What do they say when they hear that?
Well, they normally take them in good spirits. I've never fallen out with anyone, put it that way.
Oh, that's good. It's good, Lots. It's good to build those bridges. I always say to Aline about building bridges, and because people fall out all the time about something or other, but it's good not to fall out. Well, the other thing that happens is obviously I talk frequently about failure. And I always say that we always talk about successes, and we very rarely talk about the failure that led to that success. And I say that if necessity is the mother of invention, then failure is the father of success. Have you written about failure?
Well, I suppose I've touched on it in various poems. I mean, here's one from my new collection called Sour Grapes, which was actually in Poetry Review recently. Sour Grapes. He's a failed novelist and surprised me recently when he said, "It's a shame so many women are writing these days. It's more competition. 100 years ago, hardly any did." "Well, why don't you go back even further," I said, "to the time when only monks could read and write? It would have been even easier to get published." "Good point," he said. "I'm living in the wrong period."
Glorious. No, I love it. I love it. So when people, I mean, do people take offense when you, I mean, sometimes you can be quite cutting in what you say, and shining a spotlight, if you like, warts and all. Have you had people fall out as a result of it?
I've had some people say they didn't like my poetry and they found it offensive. Yes. I remember one woman at a reading started calling out, "This is ghastly. Why is everyone laughing? These are horrible." And she was a bit of a nuisance. But, I mean, it doesn't happen very often, to be honest with you, you know.
But we like because that's that sort of anarchic side. It takes you all the way back to 1976 and that sort of era, 77, as you say, when you saw the Pistols. You want that anarchic stuff. You want to. Nowadays, people are so worried about causing offence. How do you think the landscape's changed, and what do you think about it?
Well, I suppose we live in an era of political correctness, don't we? And everybody's has to be careful what they say. You know, self-censoring. I don't know if it's a good thing or not. Maybe in some ways it is, but like all these things, I think it's gone too far. Political correctness. I think when it started out, probably the intentions were good, but like all these things, I think it's gone too far. You know.
And it is difficult. I mean, I talk to a lot of artists across all sorts of genres, from sculptures to painters to photographers to poets and songwriters and comedians as well. And there always used to be, it was George Carlin, wasn't it, who said that the secret of comedy is to work out where the line is and then go beyond it. Because if you take offence out and you take offence at everything, it's very difficult to shock people. And your work as well, you want to arouse some sort of emotion, don't you?
I suppose so, yes. I remember this one particular poem, which you might like me to read you. I got a very bad reaction from, and a reading at Thames Polytechnic, one of the first readings I did in the early 1990s. And this seemed to upset a couple of people in the audience, and they were students. And it's called Brilliant Student. And I always introduce it by saying that for some reason, they always seem to die tragically, brilliant students. And it's called Brilliant Student. Excelled in all subjects, a great sportsman, wonderful sense of humour, fell off a cliff. Active in everything, lived life to the full, a generous nature, stabbed to death at a disco. A great guy with a great future, cheerful and optimistic, head crushed in a car crash. Full of ideas, always dashing about, popular with the ladies, fell onto a javelin. A kind heart and sense of fairness, always fun to be with, inhaled his own vomit.
And the students didn't respond well to that?
Some did and some didn't is the answer to that. And there was one guy who was well, he threw a glass at me.
Oh, did he?
It whizzed past my head on stage. Fortunately, it missed me. So there you go. That was probably.
And when you, I mean, presumably that was based on stories that you'd held, or was there a bit of artistic license in there?
Oh yes, it was all artistic license.
All of it.
It was just a piss take, really, of sort of brilliant students. You know, I've always found students a bit irritating, and it was just a poem mocking them, really.
So if you find students irritating, why did you accept a gig at a student place?
Well, the money, I suppose. It was, yeah.
Well, was that your opening line? Is that I always find students irritating?
No, I didn't say that. No. I just said this poem's called Brilliant Student, and for some reason they always seem to die tragically. And then read the poem, and well, there was laughter. Some people liked it, but then this glass whizzed past my head, and a few people. So anyway, I didn't read that poem again for some years.
Oh, you didn't?
After, you know.
So you have self-censored.
Well, I mean, I do choose my favourites when I do readings. This one I rather like. I had a drink problem as a young man. I'm a lot better now, mainly because I can't physically consume the vast amounts I used to be able to when I was younger. So I drink a lot less now than I used to. But I wrote this poem some years ago, and it's called Alcoholic. I often talk to strangers in bars and sometimes wonder what it would be like to meet my late parents out for a drink together in their early courting days. Would I bore them too, ruin their evening perhaps? I can almost hear them saying, "What a sad, lonely man," as they hurriedly leave, though I prefer to think of them as being polite and kind.
And did drink rule your life for a long time?
Yes, did, yes. I had big problems with alcohol as a young man. In fact, I went to AA for a few years in my early 30s. I didn't touch a drop for a whole 2 years. And then I gradually drifted back to it. But yes, it caused me a lot of problems as a young man. Alcohol did, yes, yeah. I was always upsetting people. I could be quite obnoxious when I was drunk, and I was just, but I mean, I suppose it was great fun as well, a lot of it, I was always in pubs, I was a pub drinker,
And a lot of people, I mean, we've had a lot of people on the show who have struggled with alcohol and eventually found some sort of ways of coping, either through AA or talking about it with others. But it seems to be a sort of, for others, it seems to be a lifelong struggle. How have you coped?
Well, as I said to you, as I got older, I just found that I couldn't drink as much physically. It just made me throw up. So I have a natural stopping point now, which is maybe about 6 pints of beer. Whereas when I was younger, I could drink twice that amount in an evening, But these days, I just can't physically drink a lot of alcohol anymore. I can still drink a fair bit, I mean, I suppose some people, doctors, would still say 6 pints a night is a lot. But it's half of what I used to be able to drink when I was in my 20s and 30s. And also, I'm calmer in myself. I don't have as much angst as I used to have. I used to be, I suppose it was the old struggling writer one. I mean, I didn't have any success really till my mid 30s. So I suppose I suppose I'm a bit happier in myself now.
And has that affected your writing though? Because so often people always say if you like, it's that cliche that you have to be struggling as an artist to be able to write. Do you find that now you're in a better place? Has that affected your writing?
Well, it's probably changed a bit, but I'm still able to write good pieces, I hope. It's maybe changed a bit in style. A lot of those early poems were quite angry poems. But no, I'm still able to write just as well. Yeah.
And at the moment, then, I mean, you talked about bringing it right up to date. You're, as you say, a very prolific writer. You talked about these current times. You talked about coronavirus and so on and so forth. Do you write about politics as well?
I don't really write political poems, no.
Are there other subjects you would stay well clear of apart from politics? Do you deal with religion?
Well, yes, I write quite a bit about religion.
I was going to say, coming from a strong Catholic family, six of you plus your parents, and that whole wonderful thing. How did that mold one? Pick me one of those poems.
Well, here's a poem about. If I can find it. Yes, it's a poem about. I suppose you could say it's a poem about religion. It's called A Bit of a Disappointment. It's from my new collection, Bad News. He wasn't very happy in heaven. It took him a while to settle down and accept he was dead. The eternity angle bothered him too. He couldn't imagine being there forever, even in his altered state. Never being able to die suddenly seemed rather unattractive. he missed his body as well, and trying to identify people was proving very difficult. God wasn't all he'd been cracked up to be either. In fact, he'd snubbed him twice in the telly lounge. No, he missed life on Earth with all its uncertainties and insecurities, and the knowledge it would someday end.
And your own faith, talk to me about that. I mean, being brought up as a staunch Catholic in that sort of family, what do you believe?
Well, I mean, I still go to Mass occasionally. In fact, there's a very big Catholic church, St. Dominic's, just 3 minutes away from where I live. And it's the Dominican order that run it. And I go most Sundays. I mean, I would describe myself as being a Catholic of sorts. Not a very good Catholic. I mean, I have my doubts about certain aspects of it.
Which bits do you doubt?
I described myself recently to my priest friend, Father Michael, who I mentioned in a few of my poems.
Yeah.
I described myself as being a devout agnostic, which I found quite funny, you know.
So which bits are you uncertain about? Because but you believe, but there are bits you don't believe. Which bits don't you believe?
Well, I believe that there's a higher power, a universal creator, who I choose to call God. I don't have problems with that. It's just I'm rather doubtful about the resurrection and the afterlife, you know. I'm inclined to think it's just non-existence, total shutdown, you know. I mean, I know Jesus was supposed to have been resurrected. I don't know what happened there. It's a strange story. He obviously did exist. There's enough historical evidence for that, but whether or not he resurrected from the dead, I just do not know. It seems quite way out, but yeah, anyway. So, but for many years, I dropped out of Catholicism altogether and never went near a church. During my communist period as a youth, I was quite left-wing as a young man, you know.
And are you still very much? Are you a communist now?
No.
What made you change?
I just became disillusioned. I just began to have my doubts about certain things. But I was very much so as a young man, and I turned away from the church, and which upset my father because, of course, he was very religious, and my mother too. And yet I was a member of the Socialist Labour Party. I was quite active politically, and I was in the Labour Party Young Socialists. I was involved with the militant tendency. You remember them? They were quite strong in Liverpool.
Well, no, absolutely, and so that's why I talk about in your poetry. If you're talking about religion and people talk about politics, because it's very much part of your life, isn't it? An important part of your life.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I suppose, you know, I grew up, you know, I sort of, I mean, I was 18 when Margaret Thatcher came to power, and I think a lot of people became very political after that. She was quite divisive in many ways, and then there was the miners' strike, and it was just quite a political period, you know.
Oh, totally political. And I think whenever we live in an age, again, we touched on this earlier, that people are divided whether we have a referendum to, let's say, Scotland will go off by itself and have independence there, or we have a referendum about Brexit, or we have votes about tier systems and things like that. Should we wear masks? Should we not wear masks? All that sort of stuff. And the advice is very, very clear. A lot of this is very divisive, isn't it?
None of it's very what, sorry?
A lot of it, all of this is very divisive.
Oh yes, I would, yeah, definitely, yes, yeah. Yes, yeah, so, yeah, I have a sister who lives in London. She lives in Kilburn, and she was a Labour councillor for many years. She works for the TUC now, and she's still very, very left wing. I was going to read you a poem about something that occurred recently. It's only short. It's called Weirdo.
Okay, weirdo. Let's finish on weirdo.
Right. It was one of those perfect summer evenings with a bright full moon, which you could see clearly through the toilet window. Have you seen the moon tonight? I said to the guy next to me. I don't want any funny business, he replied.
Paul Birtill, thank you very much for being my guest again.
Thank you.
Take care. We'll bring you back again soon. But for now, Paul Birtill, always a pleasure. Bye-bye.